Well, the sticking point then about Ukraine's path to NATO membership is at least temporarily overshadowed both by these new weapons announcements and by Turkey finally agreeing to advance Sweden's candidacy. The Kremlin has, of course, just reacted to all of these developments, saying it will take measures in the interest of Russia's security in response. So for more, we'll cross now to our international affairs commentator, Douglas Herbert, who joins me again now in the studio. So, Doug, what does Putin make of all of this?
Not much. You have to understand Putin's worldview. It all comes back to Putin's worldview, right? Which his critics will say is absolutely megalomaniacal and delusional, but it is that NATO is essentially the source of all sin. It's the world's worst thing, to put it simply. And NATO is really shorthand for the big bad United States. So when Putin looks at this, first of all, NATO is the one in Putin's worldview. And remember, this worldview is the one that is foisted on tens of millions of Russians through very strongly weaponized state-run Russian media channels, so weaponized propaganda, essentially. NATO is the one that is at fault, that is to blame, is the reason this war is happening. The war is not happening because hundreds of thousands of Russian troops last February massed along Belarus's border and unprovoked launched an invasion into Ukraine, its southern neighbor. It's because NATO is there posing this existential threat at any moment, ready to hell-bent on destroying Russia, bringing Russia to its knees, a threat to Russia's national security. So anything that emanates from this summit, anything is going to draw that sort of that default response from the Kremlin. So France's weapons deliveries are a mistake that will have serious consequences for Ukraine, according to the Kremlin, if Ukraine were ever to eventually become a NATO member, as is the big item on the agenda of this summit. It would be very dangerous for European security, which has all but been destroyed by NATO in its moves already, according to the Kremlin worldview. So basically, NATO can do nothing right. It can only do wrong, and its very existence is wrong, according to Putin's worldview. What Putin's really doing is he doesn't believe NATO will last. He believes he will outlast it. He believes that despite all of the high-minded expressions of unity and strength by Jens Stoltenberg, the NATO Secretary General, by NATO allies, it is all going to come to naught. He believes NATO will crack, public opinion in the West will sour on the Ukraine war, that the great eternal Russia will outlive the resolve and determination of the West to stand behind Ukraine in this war. That is his view. And he's also hoping that across the Atlantic, in the big bad U.S., as I said, that Trump will soon be back in power. Trump will do Putin's bidding, as the Kremlin won't say it explicitly, but as he has in the past, and that this will no longer be an issue. Perhaps Trump will even dismantle NATO, as he somehow insinuated in the past. So from Putin's worldview, this is a summit that he dismisses. He's not scared of it. They can huff and they puff, but Putin believes he's playing the clock. He has the long game. The great eternal Russia will prevail in the end over the weak, decadent NATO.
Now, is there anything then, given all of that you just said, is there anything that NATO can do to change Putin's thinking, provided that it does continue to show unity?
There are two very different questions embedded in that. Is there anything it can do to change Putin's thinking? Now, obviously, my opinion, right? No. I do not believe there's anything NATO can do to change Putin's thinking. Putin is sort of in the aspic of his own worldview, as I said. It is very much part of his DNA. He's not going to change. But NATO, that doesn't mean NATO should not perhaps follow its agenda. And what has NATO said it can do? Well, short of admitting Ukraine as a member, really looks like that's off the table, although we were surprised by Turkey's backflip on Sweden. Who knows? But it looks like, no, Ukraine will not be admitted, especially because right now it's in a war of trying to fend off this war of Russian aggression against it. So that would drag NATO into a war de facto against Russia. So that's not happening. It could extend more security commitments. We're seeing it in the form of these long-range weapons commitments. It could at some point, perhaps the aircraft, who knows? But the patience, the resolve, the determination that NATO keeps saying that as long as it takes, in quotes, NATO, if it can show that it really is in there, show the lie to Putin when Putin believes that NATO is going to crack and implode on itself, that its resolve will not stand in the face of fragile Western opinion. Show Putin that actually, yes, NATO can be resolved, this unity can last, that NATO, in a sense, can last as long as Putin is willing to last in this contest of wits, if you will, and worldviews. So it could do that, and it could also, as it's already doing, show Ukraine, give it that time timetable, and also let Ukraine onto this new Ukraine-NATO Council, which will essentially allow Ukraine to sit in on NATO strategy meetings about Ukraine's eventual membership. Remember, Russia used to be on that council. It was kicked out in 2014 after Russia annexed Crimea. So Russia knows what that council means. It knows the significance of that council as well. So there are things that NATO can do, NATO is doing, but I think resolve is the biggest thing, and show Russia that when it says as long as it takes, it means as long as it takes.
Going also in that direction, it looks like the G7, this just in, is going to be making a declaration on security assurances for Ukraine as well. So it does indeed look like that unity is set to continue, at least for the coming future. Douglas Herbert, thank you very much.